Guys, it's Alex, and today I'm here with a review for The Tattooist of Auschwitz by Heather Morris. This is a historical fiction novel about a Jewish man who was sent to Auschwitz in 1942 and became the tattooist there for almost 3 years. Though it's fictional, the story is heavily based on true events, and Heather Morris spent a lot of time interviewing the real Leil Sokolov about his life. This book has been getting a lot of hype on BookTube, and a lot of people really adore it. And I was very excited for this book because I do really enjoy reading about World War II and the Holocaust. That's a particular niche that I really enjoy, whether it's fiction or nonfiction. But I thought this book was just okay. I gave it 3 stars, and it was fine. Overall, that was the feeling that I came away with. This was a fine book. But for me, it wasn't a particularly great one. My biggest issue was honestly the fact that it was a fictional novel. While reading this, I came away with the feeling that this book was mostly true, that most of the things that happened in this book were Leil Sokolov's real story. It really seemed like it wasn't just inspired by the events of his life, but that it was literally about his life. And in that case, I really would have preferred if it had been a nonfiction book. I think I would have enjoyed it a lot more if it had been a nonfiction book. And I kept wondering, where were the bits that she took artistic license? Why was this a fiction? What specifically was true versus fictionalized? And I find that I feel that a fair amount when books are heavily based on true events. If they're loosely inspired, that's fine, but at the end of the day, I'd rather just read about this real person instead of reading a fictionalized version of his story. It seems like it does Leil Sokolov a disservice to fictionalize what happened to him, when it seems like Heather Morris had enough information about him and his life to write a nonfiction book. I really wish that this was nonfiction, because I feel like that would have been a much more interesting book to me. Getting on to the writing in this book, this is written in present tense, and I think most people who watched me for a little while know that I don't particularly like present tense when it comes to books. That often feels very stilted and awkward to me reading it, and that definitely stood out in this book. It didn't flow smoothly for me, and I think that's just because I don't like present tense. I don't think it's the best way to tell a story, and for me, it just personally doesn't work. So I do think that's more of a personal thing than just like a critique as a whole, but I didn't really enjoy that in this book. And one of the other big things about the writing was that it felt like it went by really fast. This entire book is about 250 pages long, and it takes place over the course of 3 years, with an additional epilogue about Leil Sokolov's future. This is Heather Morris's debut novel, and I think she largely writes screenplays, and I do feel like that came across a lot in this book. It felt very quick because of that. It felt like she wasn't quite as adept at writing the action and writing the narrative of the story as she was at the overall pacing and storytelling of the book. And because of that, it did feel like it needed just a little bit more substance to fill it out and make it feel like it went by not quite as fast as it did. It's just a very fast-paced book, and I do like things to be slowed down. But 250 pages for 3 years is not a lot of book, especially when there was so much happening to Leil and so much happening in the camps. There were a number of characters, and I wished it had been a little bit more fleshed out, a little bit more slowed down. It didn't seem like it needed to go by quite as fast as it did. Although, honestly, I was kind of glad that it did go by so fast, just on the basis of how much I was enjoying it. I think if it had been like a long book, perhaps I would have liked it more because of that. Perhaps that would have made the book seem like it had more substance to me, but it also could have made it seem a little bit more rough just because I wasn't enjoying it very much. So I was glad that I was able to fly through this very quickly. I think this book is, in large part, a romance novel, which is very strange considering it's about the Holocaust and it's not really billed as a romance novel. But most of the book is about Leil, who meets this girl named Kida and falls in love with her within Auschwitz. And that was the part of the story I didn't enjoy as much. There was a heavy focus on the romance, and it felt almost forced and unreal and fake, which was especially strange to me because this is based on a true story, and I don't know how much of it felt fake because of the writing style, or how much of it felt fake because it was manufactured by Heather Morris. Like, I don't know where the lines were for that, so it's hard for me to critique it because I can't critique it in that regard if it was Lael's true story, because obviously you can't critique the events of someone's life. But this is fiction. Like, Heather Morris wrote this as fiction, and as fiction, it didn't work for me. It felt fake. I didn't buy into the romance aspect. There was so much going on within Auschwitz, obviously. There were people dying and being murdered constantly. There was death and destruction and fear everywhere. But the bulk of this book was just about the romance. I didn't particularly enjoy that aspect. I didn't think it was very well done. But I just don't know how much of that was Heather Morris and how much of that was the real story. And I think that is an issue that comes into play when you're reading a book that was based on true events, because sometimes the fiction and the nonfiction don't necessarily blend together well. And that was kind of how I felt about this book. Overall, I just don't have a lot to say about this. It was fine, it didn't live up to the hype for me, and I found it kind of disappointing. It was just a pretty middle of the road 3-star read. I will probably forget about it fairly soon. And I don't know if that's perhaps just because I have read so much literature about that time period that maybe people who haven't read quite as much as me would appreciate this more, because there was definitely some interesting information in here. I really did enjoy a lot of the information, the new information that I got about Auschwitz that I hadn't previously known. But at the same time, I really would have preferred to get that information in a nonfiction book. But it was fine. It was okay. Not a whole lot more, but I am glad that I did read it just to see what the hype was about. Let me know down below if you read The Tattooist of Auschwitz and what you thought of it if you did. I'd really like to hear your opinions and like why specifically people love this book so much, because I do know it's gotten so many 5-star reviews and it's incredibly highly rated, especially from a lot of people that I watch. So I'd be down to hear what you think of my sort of mediocre thoughts on this book. As always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see y'all again soon.